Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, a roadmap for converged IT-OT security operations. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Firstly, if for whatever reason you are cut out from the presentation, don't worry, as we will have a recorded version which we can send you. Today, I'm joined by none other than Rani Kehat, the CISO for Reactive, and Aman Malhotra, cybersecurity architect at Cyberproof. Thank you guys for joining us.
Pleasure.
I'm Ben Chant. I host a lot of these webinars, and I look to really challenge our speakers. I've worked with them in some of the large engagements that we've been involved in. I get the chance to speak with customers as well. And we always have a lot of interesting topics that we want to bring to these webinars and share with everyone, as well as sharing best practices that we've applied with our clients, and talk you through exactly what those methods were. So I want to start with some introductions. Rani, would you like to go first?
Hi, pleasure to be here. CISO at Reactive. Many years ago, started out as a mechanical engineer, actually studied in London. And after that, many years in cyber, whether it's IT, open source intelligence, and risk management.
Thank you. And Aman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aman Malhotra. I'm based in India. I'm the security architect for Cyberproof. That's a quick introduction.
Great, thanks.
Back to you, Ben.
So what will we cover today? So we want to start off by giving exactly that desired state. We want to be able to understand, okay, times have changed over the last few years. Operational technology, ICS systems, the security of those systems is continuously adapting. And we're hearing a lot from the market now that there's a need to have that visibility across OT, but also IT space. So we want to be able to show exactly what that desired state should look like in a converged IT-OT SOC. Obviously, this differs for different organizations. Some organizations perhaps at a stage of maturity where they feel they want to be able to silo OT as a separate SOC to IT. But there is a justification to actually merging these two to have that overarching holistic visibility and integrating, given the types of attacks that are occurring, especially when looking at some of the recent attacks involving more nation-state-led threat actors, ransomware, etc., how they leverage both environments to be able to exploit data and hold the companies for ransom and be able to stop productivity. So we want to give that desired state of what should that architecture look like, but then actually show, okay, what are the phases that you should be adopting in your roadmap to reach that point. So first of all, going into how we get that visibility of the OT assets. And by assets, we don't just mean HMIs, PLCs, we mean the connections as well, the processes between those two environments, assessing the top risks and prioritizing remediation, baselining exactly what is that normal behavior versus abnormal behavior, not just what's good versus bad, but then also getting a piece of analysis and mitigating that improvement. And we'll talk a little bit why we've structured it in this way. And then we really want to show exactly how this can be put into practice with a case study. We wanted to show these two stats that SANS actually highlighted in their recent reports on OT ICS cybersecurity, as we feel these are particularly relevant for this topic, and really justifies the need to have more and better and accurate security visibility across the OT space. So the first one, 70% of organizations rated the risk to their OT environment as high or severe. This clearly shows that there is a need to be able to have a threat detection and response process in place to therefore counteract the risk. But at the same time, it's not just about having a threat detection and response process in place. It's about also being able to relate that back to what the key risks are for the organization. The next stat is around the need to actually know whether they have an incident in their environment. The types of attacks that occur in an OT environment is vastly different to, or can be vastly different to what's happening in an IT environment. So how do you respond to those types of threats? How do you get visibility of those threats and report them? The fact that 48% didn't know whether they had an incident just shows that there is a need to have more finite visibility and accurate visibility. Particularly when we talk about how the landscape has changed slightly, particularly this year, we can see the likes of ransomware impacting critical infrastructure is a real significant threat. And really, the more time that threat actor has, or ransomware threat actor has in your network, the more risk that's raising for the safety of your production lines, but also the productivity of your production lines. So what does that desired state really look like? So these are really the key layers of that SOC architecture that we were mentioning before, that we want to try and achieve for a converged IT-OT environment. Obviously, this is a very simplified view because you also need to consider, okay, what are the native individual OT technologies that you need to be able to collect a lot of that traffic, whether it be traffic from BMS systems, from SCADA systems, wastewater, whatever it may be, energy utilities, to collect that OT traffic. For example, IDS, or having a security gateway as well that secures those connections. So there's obviously individual layers of technology that you need to consider, but this puts into place exactly what are those security monitoring layers that we need to consider as well. So taking in straight from the IT data normalization analytics, how do you ingest that into a SIM as well as the OT, IoT asset information into the SIM as well? The SIM is a key part of that. And this is what we've done with a lot of our clients as well. And then how do you pass that through to a single converged console for secure operation teams? And then obviously, what are the key staff skills, talent that you need on top of that to actually operate that operation on a 24/7 basis, not just in terms of level 1, level 2, but also managing the platform, hunting for those incidents. So let's dive into those key phases. We look at this really, and Rani and Aman are going to go into exactly what those key phases consist of. Essentially, when we're looking at getting visibility, we want to, Aman, if you can start off with that, we want you to kind of give an overview of what are the processes, assets, tools, technologies that we need to consider. Rani will then go a little bit more into the risk side of things. After getting that visibility, how do you assess those top risks? But these 4 key areas is a good best practice methodology to adopt, because we align this very much to not only NIST model, but also to IEC framework as well. It aligns very well with that. And this is really a journey for an organization that's trying to address these 4 phases. It takes into consideration those elements of people, processes, and technologies. So Aman, can you start off with the first phase?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Let me move the slide forward once. Okay. So yeah, the first step in your OT security roadmap is to get visibility in your current OT landscape. Getting the control of your inventory will not only help you keep a check, but also help you to monitor the behavior of all the different assets. Basically, for example, you have layer 0, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. Layer 0, you might have field devices. Layer 1, you might have PLCs. Layer 3, you might have SCADA devices or HNIs or devices that are controlling the PLCs and that are running the field devices. So 1, it gives you the inventory check. You know what's going on in each and every plant. Second, it helps you monitor their behavior as well. Well, after all, you cannot, basically, you can only detect what you can monitor, and you cannot detect anything if you cannot monitor. So it's important to, you can say, in order to detect all the threats and anomalies that are going into your network, it's very important to monitor, and to monitor, it's very important to get the visibility. So that's where we come to the first step, which is visibility. And it also gives you, like, for example, what's going on into all your plants. You might have a global setup. You might have like 100 plants set up across the globe, and you want to ensure that you have complete control of your inventory, how the plant is set up, what's the topology, how the different things are functioning. So this really helps. It also helps in improving the overall security maturity of your program, addressing some key challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. Let me cover a few of them. Uh, well, when we start with any challenge, so lack of OT security professionals is often cited as the major reason for low maturity of any OT security program. We see some scenarios where security teams cannot even keep up with vulnerability alerts, patches, or even product updates that are coming in. So it's a concern for security leadership. Now, also add on a layer of adoption of new technologies, this industry 4.0 and all those things coming in. So when you have a understaffed team which is able to just catch in or tick in the base requirements of patch updates, product updates, protocol, and different vendors sending vulnerability updates. So once you are able to do that, then you move towards addressing the advanced new technologies that you are using. And that comes to the second point is the concept of increased connectivity. So as we know, more and more companies are now leveraging automation, the industry 4.0 components that are coming in. We have automated assembly lines that we, for example, see in automobiles. We see IoT devices, smart IoT devices. We have robots that are working in manufacturing plants, given a set of rules and programs that are configured and they do it, which we call the operational good behavior. But with this increased connectivity, the exposure of OT side of things, it also exposes all the OT side of things to the internet and also the IT part of things. So we need to ensure that all security controls are put in, and that's where we need to keep a check uh, on each of that asset as well. One more thing is there's been a lot of increase in the OT related incidents. Like for example, if you have been following the news, recent trends, there have been a lot of number of attacks that have been announced or have been reported on critical infrastructure across the globes. There have been a lot of attacks that have included attempts to disrupt operations, even compromise intellectual property. So that's very important. Also, what we notice is we see various organizations who have their own protocols and devices and all. They keep reporting all these new vulnerabilities, and the number of reportings have are now increasing and increasing exponentially. All these new vulnerabilities that are found in different protocol vendors. Given this constant reporting of vulnerabilities, organizations also feel under constant attack, and sometimes they also feel that they are losing visibility of their attack surface. And that's where it's very important to keep a check of all your assets and how they're functioning. And one more important part is the government intervention. So, in response to the increase in attacks that we are witnessing, a lot of governments around the globe we see they are also intensifying their regulatory oversights, and they have also come up with some regulatory guidelines or some best practices, some good rules, kind of a checklist that people are that organizations are asked to follow or to comply with. Also, we see some regulatory compliance that are coming up, especially within various government agencies, or which, like, for example, IEC 62443, which they are following, and that becomes very important if we have to follow that compliance. So that's thing. So these were all the challenges and everything, which makes it very important that you should have great visibility or deep visibility into your all the plans so that you can find out what all the OT assets and IPs are doing. What you can monitor or what you should track, maybe like for example, if you say, okay, visibility, getting visibility into a network is important, into all my plans is important. Now what's the next step? What should I what should I track? Okay, what should I record? So it's things like, for example, all the assets, all the IPs communicating to each other. If we can get a network map of it, attack vector kind of thing, that an example that you see, that's even better. You can understand the topologies they interact with, the source IP communicating with the destination IP, which device type is communicating to which device type. what is the device name, what is the MAC address, what is the vendor name, are they within the WAN network or they are not, what's the severity, what's the protocol they are using, what's the transport mechanism they are using. So if we track all of that, we get a better control and we are able to then move to the next stages that we will discuss.
So
yeah,
Aman,
back to, yeah.
one question for you on this is that we've received through the Bright Talk platform from one attendee. Wants to know how this kind of process differs from doing CMDB, inventory mapping, etc. Is there a key difference here in that? Are you suggesting yes, they should apply those same sorts of inventory mapping processes, or take a slightly different approach?
Okay, so I would say the detailed answer will come in phase 3, but yeah, the answer is one, of course, we try to keep the inventory of all the stuff. But second, we are able to compare that to the good behaviors, bad behaviors, the operational behavior, the security behaviors, the digital images that we capture. So you are able to, whatever data you capture, you are able to do much more than that. And you are able to
Right.
analyze the data and then come up with alerts and come up with basically the findings that, for example, something which is not as per policy, which is not as per the original process is going on, and then we can alert the right person in the right plant, and then we can ensure that we address that. So I would say it is much more than a CMDB, and we can dive deep into it when we are in phase 3.
Sure, got it. Thank you. Before we move on to the next phase, if anyone else has any questions, please do feel free to send them in, and I will do my best to sift through those and direct them at the right speaker. So, Randy, let's move on to the next phase, assessing the top risks and prioritization and remediation. Can you take us through this?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we now see the assets, and we did the discovery stage, and we have visibility, but OT is a little bit different in a certain sense that risk here is on a different level in some instances. And the fact that the process itself works a little bit differently than IT, the actual production, then as cyber people, we need to understand that. For us, usually cyber people or IT people, data is the product. That's what we manufacture. We manufacture data, we transfer data, we store data, and so on and so forth, and we protect data and certain services that are in the air, whether it's, I don't know, credit card exchange, but still at the end of the day, it's not like a production system, a physical system. And as cybersecurity people, we need to understand that. The thing with, I would say that, the biggest hop in the journey, because we are talking about CISO's journey, when we're looking at the impact and scoring the impact and working according to segregation of zones according to the assets impact and so on and so forth, we need to look at a few different aspects that we're not used to usually addressing. And what do I mean by that? Our clients as security guys will be automation engineers, and they have a different mindset, and they talk a kind of a different language. Their way of usually addressing risk, mainly addressing when an event happens, how to mitigate, remediate an event, is by redundancy and by certain process and procedures in order to stop escalation or to stop something bad happening. They usually look at an event or something happening, especially in safety, but it drizzles down also to general automation kind of mindset, is that what usually causes a fault is something to do with the actual process. It's either a faulty part or accumulation of faulty parts, or something that has to do with the process, whether it's electricity flux, whether it's pressure overload, whether it's overfilling a tank. It usually something bad happens, a loss event happens that has to do with the process. They're not minded to the fact so much, now more, but still, that there are external things to the process, external threats to the process with intention to cause harm. This is something fundamentally different in the mindset between doing or standard operational procedures, understanding what could go faulty in your process, and understanding the fact that there are certain adversaries that are going to hit the process. So in order, we can't invest our money in everything and we can't do everything. The first thing as cyber people, we have to sit down with automation guys, and that's where we meet when we talk about risk. Cyber guys will talk about malware and ransomware and masquerading and I don't know, different kinds of phishing attacks and blah, blah, blah. But the main area that we meet is when we are addressing risk. And we're saying, okay, this can happen, and what are the consequences? So the next stage, after we understand the underlying cyber or TCP/IP infrastructure, the networking infrastructure, to understand what impact does this asset and what group or zone does this asset belong to in the sense of impacting the process, and furthermore, even more important, impacting issues like health, safety, and environmental. A lot of the automation guys, if they're listening here, will think to themselves, well, I've got safety systems, redundancies. I mean, if this goes wrong, I've got another system that will take care of it. Again, the way automation guys look at things is, kind of a probability tree. What's the probability of 3 things failing one after the other? Very low. That's, kind of the way the thinking is. But in a cyber attack, an attacker will attack all 3 layers, especially if they're connected, especially if there is a way from one asset to reach another asset. I'm talking to automation guys and they will say, I have 2 switches for everything and 2 ports for everything, and everything is in full redundancy. But the attacker will attack both at the same time. He will attack your redundancy and your main process line together. He will attack your main storage and your backup storage, if he's allowed to. So that's a fundamental mind shift between cyber guys and automation guys. And that's what we need to explain. And that's what we do with helping the client, go through the journey of dividing, separating. I think one of us is on really, Aman, are you on mute? Oh, well, there's some screaming going on and it's not from me.
I was on mute.
Okay, so I don't have any kids here, so I'm in work. And the issue of taking this journey with people who are usually trained in IT and in cybersecurity is to explain to them how the process works, what are the safety systems in that process, what is the connectivity in that process, how to separate into impact and to zones, and then once you have that, and you can see the heat map in the slide, when an alert comes in, you know how to prioritize and understand the meaning of that alert. So basically, that's the next step after the visibility, understanding the significance of the alerts that are coming in, and understanding how to divide the different zones, cyber-wise, network-wise, privileges, and so on, and not just looking at the physical and automation part of the equation.
Yeah, and thanks, Ray. We we've also got this screenshot here. Can you perhaps just explain the significance of this? Is this? We've got one question asking if this is specifically Radiflow's ISID or Chiara
What
dashboard.
was, yeah, okay. What we're seeing here is actually the Chiara dashboard, which is a risk dashboard. It takes in information after the discovery stage that Aman described before, when we see the assets, the connectivity, the conduits, and so on and so forth. Then on this platform, basically this is where IT meets OT. This is when an IP address meets a industrial process. It means that this asset at this IP address is in charge of this valve, which is on this boiler, or this actuator is on this engine. This is where they meet. And the client will give an impact to each one of them. And then we will simulate different breach attacks. We'll go into it later on in stage 4 in order to drop these different zones and different business processes on a heat map of impact versus likelihood of a threat.
Great. Thanks, Ronnie. We do have another question, but I think we should wait towards the end, as we may be able to address it then. It's particularly around information security program and policies. So let's move on. Phase 3, we're looking at exactly now that we've prioritized those risks. How can we get visibility of what's being baselined as normal activity versus abnormal activity? So, Aman, can you give us an overview on this phase?
Sure. So generally, when you think about a OT plant or a manufacturing plant, like for example, the image that you see on the slide, so it's about what processes you have to follow to maybe manufacture a product, distribute, for example, water distribution, power distribution. So there's some set of rules, set of processes and steps that you generally follow, and then apply that to operations. For example, in this example, if you are building a car, you have a full-fledged assembly line that you have in place. So there's step by step. For example, you put the frame in, you put the base in, then you put all the engines and everything in, the frame in and everything. So there's a process defined. So there's, you can say, when we look into all these processes, I'm only talking about the operational processes for now. So when we look into all these processes, we can say, okay, these are the good processes and these are bad. For example, a bad process can be you're putting two engines, okay, you're repeating something or you're skipping some step. So that becomes a bad behavior, right? So all this, so generally, when we think of OT, there are good behaviors and bad behaviors. But when it comes to security in an OT, there are much more than good behaviors and bad behaviors. In fact, there are 5 of them. So that's what you see on the screen, the list of 5 things that generally we take care of when we talk about and when we address the security side of it. The first one is the behavior anomaly. So behavior anomaly is mostly basically detecting user and network behaviors. So generic users and network behavior, detection of any change that comes in system, any network, any change in the user behavior that we have defined or we have baselined the behaviors, any image or sorry, any deviation or any change from that, immediately you get an alert or a notification. So generally what happens is, for example, if I talk about network messages are compared against the baseline digital images, and it detects abnormal behaviors considering, for example, things like device sampling time, device or any changes in operation value, for example, skipping a step, going for 2 steps, or a user who does not have a right command is going for some changes, or a user who cannot access, for example, inventory data, or a user who cannot place order on behalf of purchasing team. He tries to go ahead or beyond his usual behavior and do something different. So that's all you can say anomalies in the usual network and user behavior. Then comes the two most important things: security behavior and operational behavior. So this is very important because generally when we try to define it and when we speak to a lot of people, they tend to mix it. But there is huge difference between the two. Security behaviors, you can say, is to do everything about policy management, policy monitoring. So for example, monitoring of network traffic for a user defined policy. It can, if it violates a policy, for example, you get a notification. Whereas operational behavior is everything to do with the operational process or the manufacturing step by step that you have to do for day to day operations. Let me clarify with an example, it will become more clear. So for example, I'm working in a manufacturing plant. I am the person who controls the SCADA systems, for example, the PLCs, the HNIs, and all that. I am working with my system. Now I have to issue a command. Okay, I have to issue a command and I have to start a machine so that it can run and give the orders to the machine or run the process which is supposed to run, like 1 2 3 steps that are supposed to run. So let just imagine I have to do that. So what I will do, instead of connecting to the usual thing, maybe I connect to some unauthorized zone, okay, or some unauthorized network that I should not connect, and then start the machine. So if I talk about operational behavior, it is correct because I'm starting the machine and I'm following 1 2 3. But in terms of security behavior, the policy does not state that I should connect to any environment outside my current environment. So that's a security violation. But if you see in terms of operations, it's not an violation. However, if I go and I change a step, okay, change a design, change a step or everything. So if I'm changing the steps or everything, then of course the behavior anomaly might trigger, will trigger, in fact, but that's an operational change. But the policy, it might not be affecting any other policy. So the second point, which is security behavior, might not change. So that's where you can say all these three are very closely linked, but still these three are very different and we need to keep track so that we ensure that we cover all corners. So one is the usual behavior, the network and user. The network is behaving as it is, the users are behaving as it is. Any deviation from the baseline behavior, you get an alert or a notification. Security behavior, which is everything to do with your security policies. For example, I have access to a particular system, I can access some network, like I'm not authorized to access internet, but I'm not allowed to connect my phone, USB, and all those things. So if I violate a security policy, then it's security behavior. When I violate a day-to-day operational step, it's operational behavior. So that's how we generally define the three types of thing. And then we have the fourth and the fifth one, which is mostly similar to the IT side of things, the signature based and rule based. What we generally do as a MSSP provider, like for example, if I'm building a security program for uh, a company, okay, and let me also try to address the question that was Ben, that you were mentioning. So broadly, there will be five things. One is I ensure all the security policies and processes are in place. Second, I ensure that I have visibility into all my plans. I get a complete inventory check. Third, I'm able to monitor that, manage risk and everything, which Rani was also mentioning. Four, I have a team that whatever alerts I'm getting or whatever deviation, threats, anomalies that the system is showing. For example, I install Radiflow uh, isint server. Okay, I install isint server for Radiflow in one of the plant. So anything that comes in, so I should have someone to monitor that. And then the fourth one is basically to improve of that, and we ensure that okay, we are analyzing all the alerts that are coming in, and then later we go and see okay what we need to do about it and the changes that we make into our processes. So that's broadly the high level security program. When I when I talk about signature based and rule based, for example, if I install an ISIT server of Radiflow in any of the plant, what I will do, I will set some rules. I will ensure that I am accounting for vulnerabilities. I am accounting for threat intelligence, for example. So I will have all these rules defined that will take account of basically the behaviors, the data that we are capturing, the PCAP files and all those things, and issue alerts whenever there is a deviation or whenever there is that detection rule triggers, and signature based as well. So these are generally signature based and rule based things. So these are, you can say, broadly the 5 ways that we are able to baseline normal activity versus an abnormal activity. And using these 5 methods or 5 ways, we are able to generate alerts or generate a notification, then which for which there can be a team to evaluate, of course, filter out any false positive, or maybe try to action on any alerts that is required. So let me go to the next slide. Yeah, basically this all explains the various attacks and various scenarios that I was just mentioning. The visibility, the cyber attacks, policy monitoring is basically security behavior based. Maintenance management and anomaly comes into operational side. And of course, we have signature and rule based as well, which are not here, but yeah, we covered. So back to you, Ben. Or if you have any questions, Ben, for me.
Yeah, sure. We do actually have one question that's come in. One viewer is asking, do you support different baselines? For example, alerts for normal, maintenance, and emergency plant operation modes. So I'm guessing this is in the context of Cyberproof Radiflow. Obviously, Cyberproof are a MDR MSSP provider. So we run and manage the technology of Radiflow. Radiflow provide the technology. So I guess this can kind of go either way. I don't know, Aman, if you want to start off, as you've been speaking recently, more about the alert side of things.
Yeah, the short and the quick answer is yes. The alerts for normal, any maintenance. For example, in the slide also, you can see the point number 4. For example, if any monitoring, any network is there, and you see monitoring networks for any anomalous commands that occur during system maintenance. So you have scheduled some maintenance and you see, okay, there are some commands or some spikes that you are getting into the system, or some notification that you're coming that should not be what you have accounted for or what your behavior profiles allows, then of course all that alerts can be triggered. And the different scenarios that were mentioned, we can ensure that we cover all those scenarios, and whatever does not cover in the behavior side of things, we can cover in the rule side of things.
Great, thanks, Aman. Now, now the next phase, I want to ask Rani to explain, because Rani, as we know, we've had experiences with customers where this is a constant question, and particularly going back to phase 2, you talked a bit about expressing or being able to define the risks and the mitigations, etc. We'll be able to prioritize the remediations. So now we've gotten to a point in phase 4 where we've been able to deviate what is the normal and abnormal behavior. Now we need to analyze that and take the right mitigations and have a plan for improvement. So what are the steps we need to take in order to do that?
Okay, great, thanks. Just as a very short introduction to my answer. I've done my time in a SOC, and it's more or less like a prison, so that's how I'm using that term. It's very difficult at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning when you're receiving events coming in to prioritize and to understand and to have context and to know how to triage what is actually happening. So that's the first thing about the importance of analyzing and understanding and having context to the alerts that are coming in from the process of baselining, and then obviously alerts on top of the baseline and anomalies and so on, and events coming in, and giving it context and understanding what is the meaning of those alerts. The other thing I would like to mention is the way many times you talk to people and they kind of differentiate between risk and Secops, between actually doing or having the process of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 in a SOC, getting the alert, mitigating, playbooks, standard operational procedures, root cause, and all those actions and tasks that you have to do in a flow. It's not disconnected from risk. Risk is the engine behind it. In order to understand exactly what to do first and why you're doing it and who are you waking up in the morning, then the answer is risk. Now, a lot of the security controllers, including IDSs, I'm going now to the first block where I'm talking about threat intelligence and adversaries, are trying to understand threat likelihood, are trying to give some kind of value score to a threat likelihood of something happening. And if something does happen, try and get some insight. Who could that be? What technique is he using? What ATT techniques and tactics is he using? What's his end game? Is he trying to do a denial of service? Is he trying to maybe blackmail me by encrypting my data? Is he trying to maybe steal my secret source in the production? Where is he going? So in order to understand and to do risk, we don't only look at vulnerabilities, and this is something very important, because at the stages we've discussed up till now, which is the visibility, we actually look at the assets, the protocols, the interconnectivity, and we look at the vulnerabilities. A vulnerability depends how there's different definitions of vulnerabilities. Basically, a vulnerability is a weakness. It can be a weakness in processes. It can be a weakness in people. They don't know enough. They haven't been trained. It can be that's a vulnerability. It can be a vulnerability in a backdoor of an application. It could be anything. According to the FAIR, F-A-I-R organization, they've added also the fact that a vulnerability is actually something that can cause a loss event, something that if somebody exploits the vulnerability, then bad stuff, i.e. you're losing either money or, God forbid, life. So when we are doing risk, and one of the factors of risk is basically, I won't go too deep into it, but it's based on two weights. One is the magnitude of your loss, the impact, how much money you're going to lose, which we talked about in the first stage of putting assets into zones and impact zones. And the second is what is the likelihood of a loss event happening. Both of those become risk. And in order to do that, in order to give the SOC true information about the risk, you've got to use threat intelligence and understand your adversaries. So we model the adversaries in your region, in your sector. We look at their kill chain. We use the MITRE, M-I-T-R-E framework. And we start simulating all these attacks according to the MITRE framework on a virtual image. Obviously, we can't do that in OT. It's not like breach attack that we do in IT. Because in IT, you know, if you break something, you just spin up another VM. We can't do that with a generator. We can't spin up another generator, you know. So we do a virtual breach attack simulation in order to understand and give risk, i.e. threat likelihood, with the impact that we talked about before, to give that information to be used in two ways. One way is to prioritize the controls that should be in your network. This is proactive. This is not reactive. This is proactive. This is saying, I've seen this adversary come into the market. He is very relevant to my network because with the IDS that Aman talked about, we've did a snapshot of your network, of your system. We know what assets, what vulnerabilities, who talks to who, the interconnectivity, the conduits, all that stuff. So we simulate an attack of this new adversary on your network, and we say you have to prioritize this security control. You've done very little in access control or data confidentiality, or maybe even timely response. These are things that you have to do better because they are right in line of your next attacker. The other aspect that we use this information of risk, i.e. threat intelligence and vulnerabilities and the digital image, is for security operations, is reactive. So when an alert comes in, you are able to understand exactly how to prioritize it. You know what zone it's part of. You know the asset is a high impact asset. You might have a description of what that asset actually does. Is it connected to some safety issue? Has it got maybe any, or let's say inherent risk, i.e. if something happens to this asset, something bad will happen to another asset. So all these things, all this information has to be taken into account, and that is what we do in this phase. After we simulate and understand the risk, send that information to be proactive and reactive in our security management. Once we understand the threat landscape and how the adversary, none of us have profits, but we have to rely on data. We can't just have an opinion that's because the latest report we read and somebody has another opinion because he read a different report. That's good. We have to get that information in, but we have to have some kind of data-driven methodology. And that's why we use a breach attack simulation, a virtual breach attack simulation on OT environments. And once we understand how the attack vector is going to affect your impact and your business processes, we can then understand which controllers are best to put in the way of the attacker. So now I'm getting into the third step, which means that once we understand what is the controller or the next controller for the next stage of the attacks that are coming in, and we have data to back our arguments, we look completely different when we come to the board and describe the need for a budget. We can show the loss from a downtime of a process in relationship to the investment in a cyber controller. And all the business guys, the people on the board, can take a business decision whether or not they are willing or they wish to buy this controller and mitigate the risk, or they're going to accept the risk. That's also possible. But the level of discussion that we're now having with the board is dollars and cents, which is a language that they can understand, makes sense to them. They understand that we're not just asking for the next startup or WizKid in cybersecurity, but we are explaining what data we've got and what are our predictions, and obviously for the next attack. And we budget how to mitigate in relationship to the loss. So once we have that and it's data-driven, not just opinionated, then it's completely different ballgame of getting the budget and planning our ISMS, what we're going to do next quarter, next year, and so on and so forth, according to the urgency, high, medium, and low, and so on. And that urgency is derived from the threat likelihood we simulated, and we have those data points in order to form an opinion. Risk isn't a one-off, and that's one of the most important things to take in. You do a risk assessment, and after 3 months, your threat landscape has changed, your adversaries has changed, techniques has changed, new malwares have come out, you've changed something in your network, you've added new assets, you've added new vendors, you've opened new ports, you've opened new protocols, you're interconnected with a third party, chain of supply. Things are changing all the time, very quickly. OT is not what it used to be when I studied, when I went to be a mechanical engineer in the mid-80s. It's completely different now. And it's changing all the time. You can't do a risk assessment in a one-off, once a year. That doesn't make sense. Risk assessment has to be continuous as much as possible. So when you are actually automating the process, and that's what we're doing here, we're automating the process, we're sending all the time information of vulnerabilities, adversaries, changes in the digital image, changes in the ATTs that are now being used. You can always see exactly where you are, understand why your risk has changed, and you go, oh, I understand because the digital image has changed, and I opened these ports and these accesses and so on and so forth. Or that, yes, now I understand because I got an update on these 3 new adversaries who have decided that they love the food industry in Germany and decided that they're going to do some havoc over there. So it's a continuous process, and nowadays, since Industry 4.0, we have to have this automation.
Thanks, Ronnie. And I know you've got an example to show us as well, in terms of how this could look for.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that slide. Yeah, look at that, a slide.
Yeah.
Well, this is just a quick.
Put this into context, because I know this is something you wanted to cover as well. Is how you put this into context with.
I'll do that very quickly because
we're
running out of time, so I'll do that very quickly. This is just to visualize and to show, for example, what you can see here is we are looking at the different adversaries, and you can see there that this adversary is very relevant to the USA. So we mark adversaries according to their relevancy and capability, and once that is done, we take the digital image that Iman was talking about of your production network, your OT network, and we simulate hundreds and hundreds of, in different variants, race condition, the attacks on your network. And as the attacks play out, we then understand what risk scenarios are going to happen or most likely to happen. Again, we're not prophets. We're talking about probability. So we can see, for example, in a certain zone, you have loss of safety. In another zone, you might have loss of visibility. You might have a denial of service in some area, and so on and so forth, according to the simulation of these attacks. And the little kind of line that you see on the top over there, on top right-hand corner, is risk over time. Because over time, this is updated according to the changes in your network, assets, network, connectivity, and so on, vulnerabilities, new CVEs that are coming out, and obviously the adversaries that are all the time changing. So when you have this process going on, you're not just all the time being reactive to the attack that's happening now, and you have to mitigate it, and you have to, your response time and point of recovery and so on and so forth. You are also looking ahead a little bit and saying, okay, I can see now there's a trend to use this kind of tool. Now there's a trend. I can see that people are using more and more the DNS as an attack vector, and you can see how you're placed for the next threat that's coming in.
Thanks, Rani. And yes, we don't have too much time remaining, so we wanted to actually put this all into context of how we've done this with the client in the past when Cyproof and Ranifer worked together. So particularly looking at a customer that is a global real estate group, over 5,000 employees, so quite a large presence, have presence across the world, 250 cities. So being a real estate group, they had the challenge of having to monitor across their building management system. They wanted to develop that scalable cybersecurity monitoring and detection solution. So they wanted to have that via a converged SOC. Because by the very nature, and this is, what can be a bit scary at times for these kind of organizations, is that they have their BMS systems obviously involve a lot of integrated services, a lot of vectors, where that can be multiple vendors for utilities, for electricity, water supply, access control, fire alarms, and more, particularly remote zones, which makes it extremely difficult to provide that protection, but also that visualization across the network, and those kind of cybersecurity related insights. So for this customer, they were really looking to get timely notifications of when there were any vulnerabilities or threats that were making their way across IT, OT, and IoT systems, but then also have that capability, and this is a key part here, to be able to then respond rapidly, isolate the environments once that was verified as a potential threat to their business. And really, these are the kind of, to try and put it into, I guess, a simple flow diagram of how how we actually approached it, Cyberproof and Radiflow. We said, okay, we need to be able to perform an assessment of these connected buildings. We performed that both IT and OT side of security assessments. But again, we needed to implement the right sort of sensors, the hardware, to collect the logs in real time from those BMS systems. So we had to make sure we had a solution in place via Radiflow to be able to then collect, correlate, normalize that data, make it contextualize once then being processed into the SOC environment. So for this particular engagement, after doing the initial assessment, gathering all the relevant information, we developed that detailed architecture design, which served as the basis to develop not just the architecture, but also other milestones such as mapping against vulnerabilities and attack vectors, successfully then deploying and developing those playbooks and smart alerts and incidents on the CDC platform as well. And you can see in the middle here this flow that we call that single pane of glass view, because this is what the customer needed. Having lots of distributed environments and services, they needed to consolidate that all into a centralized platform. So the traffic that we were taking from the BMS systems were collected by Radiflow's Smart Collector ISAP. This was connected to the site's local switch, which was there to be able to filter out all this traffic to focus on the critical OT-related BMS data. All of that collected traffic was transmitted securely to Radiflow's security gateway ISEG, which Rani referred to earlier on as well. So being able to host that ISEG in our environment in Cyberproof's cloud was a great benefit for us, because it meant we were able to leverage that technology, but also review and ingest that traffic quickly. Obviously, during that process, that involved processing, compressing, encrypting the data, which was, of course, vitally important. And then using Radiflow's ISID to perform that security risk analysis, dynamic scoring, which Rani covered as well, to help prioritize those risks. But the key piece here is actually being able to then link it back into a SIM platform, which the SOC team was used to using, but also actually ingesting it in a form which was already contextualized. So being able to show information directly into a SIEM environment where we had context on the severity, the relevant ports, the IPs, etc., the sources of those logs that were all brought into the context of alert. And then we needed to be able to bring that into an environment for our SOC team at Cyberproof to be able to carry out those responses and the remediations. And this is the single platform that we talk about, which the customer can use as well. And this is essentially acting as the functionality between all of these consoles. So for us, the SIM itself will carry out that correlation of the alerts, create the customized rules. But then the CDC platform, our Cyberproof Defense Center platform, collected a lot of that and performed the vulnerability monitoring, the responses, which included obviously security alert response, but also incident handling based on the playbooks that were already crafted in the CDC. And that can be tweaks as needed. Some levels could be automated or made manual. For the customer, that obviously meant having as a benefit that single view for both IT and OT operations, being able to have a shorter time to detect and respond to that security incident, as well as having real-time visibility. And only need to go to one platform for that view of the top risks that are being remediated, with the ability for us as Cyberproof to be able to go into Radiflow's ISID platform, be able to carry out those simulations, or to be able to communicate back to the customer the level of risk that we'll be able to remediate over time. This led to ultimately an architecture which I appreciate is a little bit, it can be a little bit complex when you look at it at first, but starting very much from that lower level, collecting all of the data, normalizing IT and OT data. And this aligns very much with the desired architecture diagram we started with at the beginning. And as you can see, that single pane of glass is the Cyberproof Defense Center platform, but we have the staff around that to be able to carry out the the level 1, level 2, level 3 operations to be able to customize those the use cases, ingest that threat intelligence, continuously improve those playbooks, and integrate with other technologies as well. So we're a bit out of time. It looks like we've answered most questions. So I want to say thank you to Aman and Rani for taking the time today. Really interesting discussion. Added some points here on some of the topics you can speak to each of these guys about. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well if you want to learn more about us, want some more information. Go visit our websites to find out some related articles and blogs, and look out for more invitations to future webinars. All that's left is to say thank you to our speakers, Rani and Aman.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining.
Okay. Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.